the auction listing appeared quietly, almost apologetically, on a real estate website in early October 2025. There were no bold headlines, no dramatic descriptions, just a handful of carefully worded sentences and a familiar address tucked away in rural Rhode Island. To most viewers, it looked like any other colonial-era farmhouse. White wooden siding, a pitched roof, a modest stretch of land surrounding it. But to those who knew even a fragment of its history, the listing felt wrong, disturbingly wrong, because this was not just any house. This was the Perron family farmhouse, the house the world knew by another name, the Conjuring House. Built in the early 1700s. The property had stood through revolutions, wars, and generations of silent decay. Its beams were older than the United States itself. Its walls had absorbed centuries of whispered prayers, arguments, births, deaths, and, according to legend, far worse. For decades, the house had been the center of one of the most infamous haunting cases in American history. Investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren in the early 1970s, the house had inspired books, interviews, court testimonies, and eventually a blockbuster horror franchise. Yet, despite its fame, the house had always resisted something modern society demanded: closure. Now, in 2025, it was being sold. The timing was unsettling. The auction date was set for October 31st, Halloween night. The listing did not mention ghosts. It did not reference the Warrens. It did not acknowledge the countless visitors who claimed to hear footsteps in empty rooms or feel unseen hands brush past them in narrow hallways. It simply described the property as historic and unique for paranormal researchers, historians, and horror enthusiasts alike. The silence was deafening. Within hours of the listing going live, screenshots began circulating on forums and private paranormal groups. Discussions erupted. Why now? Why Halloween? And more importantly, why auction the house instead of selling it traditionally? Some speculated financial pressure. Others suggested publicity. But a smaller, quieter group asked a different question altogether. What happened inside the house that forced the owners to let it go this way? Because this was not the first time the Conjuring House had changed hands, and each time it did, something followed. The previous owners had opened the house to overnight guests, investigators, and tour groups. For years, visitors paid to sleep inside its rooms, record EVP sessions, and document supposed paranormal activity. Many left shaken. Some refused refunds. A few returned years later, still insisting that something had followed them home. Official statements dismissed these claims as imagination and suggestion, but internal maintenance logs, leaked quietly online, told a different story. Doors unlocking themselves, motion sensors activating in empty rooms, security footage corrupted at the same hours each night. Then, suddenly, the house closed to the public. No announcement, no explanation. Just months later, the auction appeared. Local residents noticed things too. Neighbors reported increased police presence on the property in the weeks before the listing, though no reports were ever filed. A nearby farmer claimed his livestock refused to approach the fence line closest to the house. Another resident reported seeing lights on inside the building long after it was supposed to be empty. The most chilling detail, however, came from the auction terms themselves. Buried deep within the legal documents was an unusual clause. The sellers refused liability for psychological distress resulting from prolonged occupancy. No elaboration, no precedent to skeptics. It meant nothing. To those familiar with the house's history, it felt like a warning. As Halloween night approached, interest skyrocketed. Paranormal YouTube channels speculated wildly. True crime forums dissected every word of the listing. Yet the house itself remained silent, waiting, as it always had. Because the Conjuring House had never been abandoned. It had merely been patient. Long before the house would earn a name whispered by paranormal investigators and horror fans alike. It was simply a working farmhouse, isolated, practical, and unforgiving. Built in 1736 by the Arnold family, the land it stood on was already considered difficult. The soil was stubborn, the winters cruel, and the forest pressed in close, as though reclaiming what humans had briefly borrowed. Early town records described the area as quiet but ill-favored, a phrase that appeared more than once in documents from the time. Even then, something about the land unsettled those who lived nearby. The Arnolds were among the first to settle there permanently. They were not wealthy, but they were resilient, and resilience was required to survive on that property. According to church records, multiple members of the family died on the land over several generations. Infant mortality was common in the 18th century, but the number of deaths associated with this single household was unusually high. Some were attributed to illness. Others were vague, sudden, unexplained, or simply left blank. One name appears repeatedly in later retellings: Bathsheba Sherman. Bathsheba married into the family and lived in the house during the mid-1800s. She was unremarkably tending church regularly, maintaining the household, raising children, but whispers followed her even while she was alive. Local rumors accused her of practicing dark rituals, of cursing neighbors' livestock, of harboring something unnatural within her walls. None of these claims were ever proven. In fact, Bathsheba was never convicted of any crime. Yet the rumors persisted, passed down through generations, like a warning disguised as gossip. The most infamous story surrounding Bathsheba involved the death of an infant under her care. According to legend, the child was found dead with what appeared to be a needle embedded at the base of its skull. Some claimed it was a sacrifice. Others argued it was a tragic accident, exaggerated by fear and superstition. Official records ruled the death inconclusive. Bathsheba walked free, but the damage had already been done by the time she died at the age of 71. Bathsheba was deeply feared. Her body was discovered in the house, stiff and cold. Witnesses later claimed that her corpse appeared unnaturally preserved, with eyes that seemed fixed open in anger. Again, these details are impossible to verify. But one detail was recorded. Her burial was rushed, and the grave was placed on the property itself, not far from the house. Over the following decades, the land changed owners many times. Few stayed long. One family reported hearing footsteps above their heads while sleeping, despite living in a single-story section of the house. Another claimed doors would open on their own, no matter how often they were locked. Livestock refused to enter the barn. Children spoke of a woman who hated them. What makes these accounts disturbing is not their drama, but their consistency. Independent families, decades apart, describing the same experiences with eerily similar language. A presence that smelled of rot. A woman who watched from corners. A force that grew angrier the longer a family stayed. Historical documents confirm at least 8 deaths on the property. Before the 20th century, some from illness, others from accidents, and a few under circumstances never fully explained. One man reportedly hanged himself in the attic. Another drowned in a nearby river under conditions that made little sense. The land seemed to accumulate tragedy the way old wood absorbs moisture. By the early 1900s, the house had gained a reputation. Locals avoided it. Children dared one another to approach the fence line. Farmers refused to let their animals graze nearby. The house stood occupied, yet isolated, present, yet avoided. And then, in 1971, the Perron family arrived. They had no knowledge of the house's darker history. No one warned them. The property was affordable, beautiful even. Sunlight poured through the windows during the day, illuminating wide wooden floors and thick beams that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. To them, it was a dream. Within weeks, the dream began to rot. At first, the disturbances were small, cold spots. Objects moved slightly from where they were left. Strange smells drifting through the rooms like spoiled meat or something long buried. The children spoke of spirits casually, as though it were normal. Their mother, Caroline, felt hands touching her in the night. The Perrons did not know what no one told them was that every family before them had experienced the same pattern. The house did not attack immediately, watched it, waited, and it always chose its moment. At first, the Perron family dismissed the strange occurrences as nothing more than the quirks of an old house. Built centuries earlier, the farmhouse groaned at night, its wooden bones expanding and contracting with the cold New England air. Caroline Perron told herself that the footsteps she heard were echoes, that the doors opening on their own were victims of uneven frames and stubborn hinges. Rational explanations were comforting, necessary, but the house did not allow comfort to last. Within days of moving in, all 5 Perron daughters began reporting the same thing, the sensation of being watched. Not occasionally, constantly. They described it in the same way, using words far beyond their years. A pressure in the room, a heaviness that made breathing feel deliberate. At night, they refused to sleep alone, insisting that something moved in the darkness just beyond their beds. Caroline was the first to experience physical contact. She awoke one night to the unmistakable feeling of hands gripping her arms, not gently, firmly, as if someone or something was trying to wake her in a hurry. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty. Her husband Roger was asleep beside her. The door was closed, yet the sensation lingered, leaving behind deep red marks that slowly faded by morning. From that night on, the disturbances escalated. Objects began moving with intent. Brooms toppled over despite standing securely. Chairs were found overturned in rooms no one had entered. One afternoon, Carolyn discovered that every single clock in the house had stopped at the exact same time, 3:07 a.m. None resumed working afterward. The smell came next. A sudden, overwhelming stench of rotting flesh would drift through the house without warning, then vanish just as quickly. It did not come from the kitchen. It did not come from outside. It appeared in hallways, bedrooms, even the staircase lingering long enough to induce nausea before dissolving into clean air. The girls learned to recognize it instantly. When the smell appeared, they knew something else was close. The spirits, if that was what they were, seemed particularly drawn to Caroline. She felt them most strongly. During the day, she sensed invisible presences brushing past her in narrow corridors. At night, she experienced vivid nightmares that felt less like dreams and more like memories being forced into her mind. She saw women hanging from trees, children crying in darkness, a figure standing at the foot of her bed, staring with open, furious eyes. One morning, Caroline woke to find herself levitating. Her body was suspended several inches above the bed, rigid and unmoving, as if held in place by unseen hands. She could not scream. She could not move. Then, without warning, she was thrown violently back onto the mattress, gasping for air. Her daughters rushed in moments later. Having heard a loud crash echo through the house, they all began to believe the same thing. The house was not haunted. Randomly, it was targeted. Spirits revealed themselves to the children in different ways. One daughter spoke of a young boy who played hide-and-seek in the hallways. Another described an old man who sat silently in a corner, watching her sleep. But the most terrifying presence was always the Sama woman, who hated the family for living there. Caroline later claimed this entity identified itself as Bathsheba. The name came unprompted. The spirit appeared to her in waking visions, whispering threats, insisting that the house was hers, that Caroline was an intruder, that her children would suffer if they did not leave. Each encounter drained Caroline physically. She grew pale, exhausted, and increasingly fearful of the night. The house seemed to respond to fear. The more frightened the family became, the more aggressive the phenomena grew. Doors slammed with enough force to crack frames. The girls were pulled from their beds by their hair. One child was nearly strangled by an unseen force in the living room. Her body lifted as though by an invisible noose before being dropped to the floor. It was no longer possible to pretend the Perrons were not sharing their home with memories or imagination. They were sharing it with something intelligent, something territorial, something that had been there long before the man had no intention of leaving. Desperate for answers, Caroline began researching the property's history. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Death after death, tragedy layered upon tragedy. Families who fled without explanation, lives that unraveled after spending time within those walls. Every path led back to the same truth. The house did not forget, and once it acknowledged you, it did not let go easily. By the time the Perrons reached out for help, they were no longer asking if the house was haunted. They were asking how to survive it. And that was when two names entered the story. Ed and Lorraine Warren. By the time Ed and Lorraine Warren first set foot on the Perron property, they were already controversial figures. To believers, they were pioneers, experienced investigators who had confronted some of the most disturbing paranormal cases in modern history. To skeptics, they were sensationalists who blurred the line between research and performance. What neither side disputed, however, was this: the Warrens had seen things most people never wouldn't. They took the Perrons' pleas seriously. The visit was arranged quietly. No press, no cameras, just a family at the edge of collapse and two investigators accustomed to walking into places Most people ran from Dot. Lorraine felt it immediately, the moment she stepped out of the car. She later said, the air around the house felt wrong. Not cold, not heavy, but hostile, as if the structure itself resented being observed. She refused to enter through the front door at first, instead walking the perimeter of the property in silence, occasionally stopping, her eyes unfocused, as though listening to something no one else could hear. Ed, practical and methodical, focused on the physical layout. He noted the age of the beams, the uneven floors, the way sound carried unnaturally through certain rooms. He had learned long ago that old houses could amplify fear, but this felt different, purposeful, directed. When they finally gathered the family in the living room, Lorraine did not hesitate. This house is not haunted by one spirit, she said calmly. It is infested. She explained that what existed in the farmhouse was not a single ghost, but multiple entities, some benign, others deeply malevolent. According to her impressions, the darker presence had authority over the others. It did not simply coexist. It dominated, controlled, and it hated. Caroline Lorraine described a woman bound to the land, not by death alone, but by obsession. A spirit that believed the house belonged to her, and that any woman who attempted to claim authority within it was an enemy. The name Bathsheba surfaced again, not from research, but from psychic impression. Lorraine said the entity had presented itself proudly, with fury, and with a demand, leave. Ed warned the family of something even more troubling. In his experience, prolonged exposure to such environments could lead to psychological and physical harm, even possession. He was careful with the word, but he did not avoid it. He believed the entity was attempting to break Caroline down slowly, eroding her strength and sense of self. Despite this, the Warrens did not recommend an exorcism, not yet. The house, they explained, was too unstable, too active. Attempting a full cleansing could provoke retaliation, not just against Caroline, but against the children. Instead, they suggested a seance, a controlled attempt to communicate, identify, and possibly weaken the dominant spirit. Caroline agreed immediately. Roger did not. He had watched his wife suffer. He had seen his daughters terrorized, but the idea of deliberately inviting the entities to speak felt dangerous, like poking a wound that was already infected. His objections were noted, then gently set aside. The seance was scheduled for that same night. Candles were placed around the room. Religious symbols were prepared. The family was instructed to remain calm, to observe, and above all, not to respond emotionally to anything that occurred. Fear, Lorraine warned, was nourishment. The atmosphere changed almost instantly as the seance began. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Breath became visible. One of the candles extinguished itself, despite no draft. The house, which had been quiet for hours, began to creak and groan as though awakening from sleep. Caroline was affected first. Her breathing became shallow. Her posture stiffened. Lorraine noticed her eyes tracking something above them, something no one else could see. Then Caroline began to speak, her voice strained, unfamiliar. "She wants you gone," Caroline said, staring directly at Lorraine. "This is her house." The candles flickered violently. A chair slid across the floor on its own. One of the daughters screamed as unseen hands yanked her hair backward. Lorraine attempted to regain control, commanding the spirit to identify itself. The response was immediate and violent. Caroline was lifted from her chair and thrown across the room, slamming into a wall with bone-cracking force. She collapsed, convulsing, her body rigid. Roger lunged toward her, but Ed restrained him, shouting for the seance to end. The house erupted, doors slammed, windows rattled, the air filled with the smell of decay stronger than ever before. When it finally stopped, Caroline lay unconscious on the floor, bruised and bleeding. Lorraine was shaken. Later, she would admit that the seance had gone terribly wrong, that they had underestimated the strength of the dominant entity, that they had, perhaps unknowingly, crossed a line before leaving that night. Ed issued a final warning to the family. "The house is not trying to scare you," he said quietly. "It's trying to remove you," and, judging by what they had witnessed, it was succeeding. The house did not return to normal after the Warrens left that night. If anything, it grew more alert, like an animal disturbed from shallow sleep. The air inside the farmhouse felt charged, restless, as though something had been awakened and was now pacing just beyond sight. The Perron family sensed it immediately. The silence between disturbances was shorter. The manifestations were sharper, more deliberate. Caroline remembered very little of what happened during the seance when she regained consciousness. She was lying on the living room floor, her head cradled in Roger's arms, her body aching in places she could not explain. Dark bruises bloomed along her arms and back in patterns that did not resemble a fall. Finger-shaped marks appeared around her neck by morning, faint but unmistakable. Lorraine urged the family to photograph everything. Documentation mattered, she said, especially if things became worse, and they did. That night, the girls refused to sleep in their bedrooms. All five crowded into the same room, dragging blankets and pillows onto the floor. Even then, sleep did not come easily. The house groaned continuously, not randomly, but rhythmically, like footsteps pacing above them. At precisely 3:07 a.m., the sound stopped. Then the screaming began. One of the daughters bolted upright, shrieking that a woman was standing at the foot of the bed, not hovering, not fading, standing, watching. The others saw nothing, but the fear in her voice was contagious. Moments later, another child began crying, claiming that something was pulling at her legs from beneath the blankets. Caroline tried to comfort them, but the moment she entered the room, the temperature dropped sharply, her breath fogged in the air. The lights flickered, then died completely. In the darkness, something laughed. It was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was close. Roger searched the house with a flashlight, checking doors and windows, telling himself this was hysteria fueled by suggestion. But as he reached the staircase, he stopped. There were muddy footprints on the wooden steps, fresh, clearly defined, leading upward. They did not match any shoe in the house, and they ended abruptly halfway up the stairs, as though whoever or whatever had simply vanished. The following days blurred into a cycle of fear and exhaustion. The house targeted Caroline relentlessly. She was shoved while walking down hallways. Burn marks appeared on her skin overnight. At one point, she awoke, screaming, convinced she had been buried alive beneath the house, her lungs filling with dirt as voices whispered that she belonged to the land. Now, Lorraine returned alone a week later. She had not slept since the seance. She admitted as much the moment she arrived. Her visions had intensified, becoming intrusive and violent. She described seeing the Perron children, dead, broken bodies scattered throughout the house. She confessed that she feared the entity was not content with harassment. It wanted tragedy, something permanent. Lorraine urged the family to leave immediately, but leaving was not simple. Financially, they were trapped. Emotionally, they were conflicted. And beneath it all lurked a quieter truth that no one wanted to say aloud. The house resisted the idea of abandonment. Each attempt to discuss leaving was followed by an escalation, doors slamming, objects thrown, screams echoing from empty rooms. It was as though the house itself were listening. One afternoon, while Caroline was alone in the kitchen, the back door slammed shut with such force that the frame cracked. She turned to see a woman standing inches away from her face, old-fashioned dress, gray skin stretched tight over bone, eyes blazing with hatred. "This is my home," the woman hissed. Caroline blacked out when she awoke. She was lying outside, barefoot in the dirt. The kitchen door locked from the inside. She had no memory of leaving the house. Her feet were cut and bleeding, and her fingernails were packed with soil. Ed Warren was informed of everything. His response was grim. He believed the seance had failed catastrophically. Instead of weakening the dominant spirit, it had confirmed something to it, that it could hurt them, that it could take control. And worst of all, that no immediate consequences followed. Ed recommended a formal exorcism, but the Catholic Church refused to approve it. There was no possession, they argued, no official evidence. Without church backing, Ed's options were limited, so the family endured. For nearly a decade, the hauntings never fully stopped. But they fluctuated, periods of quiet, followed by sudden, terrifying outbursts. The children grew older, learned to live with the unseen. Caroline carried the scars, physical and emotional, long after they eventually left the house. What the public rarely hears is this: even after the Perrons moved away, the activity did not end. The house did not calm. It waited. And decades later, when it opened its doors to investigators, tourists, and thrill seekers, it remembered exactly how to behave. Because the Conjuring House does not forget fear, it learns from it. Much of what the world knows about the Conjuring House comes from interviews, books, and dramatized retellings. Names were changed, timelines were compressed, events were softened or rearranged to make them easier to consume. But according to Ed Warren's private notes documents, never intended for public release, the truth was far more disturbing than anything portrayed on screen. In the weeks following the failed seance, Ed began compiling a confidential case file. It was not meant for publishers or film producers. It was meant as a warning, an internal record of a case he believed had crossed a line. The file contained handwritten observations, sketches of the house's layout, and transcripts of recorded conversations with the Perron family. Several pages were marked with a single word written in red ink. Hostile. One entry stood out. Ed wrote that the dominant entity did not behave like a typical haunting. It did not repeat routines. It did not appear bound to a single room or object. Instead, it demonstrated awareness, strategy. It reacted differently depending on who was present, often retreating when outsiders arrived, then resuming its activity with increased aggression once they left. This is not residual, Ed noted. This is intelligent and patient. Lorraine's contributions to the file were more fragmented. Her notes read less like reports and more like confessions. She described recurring visions of the land long before the house existed. Women gathered in the forest, chanting softly, their faces obscured by darkness. She saw deaths she could not place in any historical record, bodies buried where no graves were marked, a presence that predated Bathsheba Sherman entirely, using her legend as a mask. According to Lorraine, Bathsheba was not the source, she was a symbol. The true entity, Lorraine believed, had no name. It attached itself to the land itself, feeding on suffering over generations. Each tragedy strengthened it. Each family that fled left something behind: fear, grief, despair that soaked into the structure like blood into wood. One particularly chilling note described an experiment Ed conducted without the family's knowledge. During a follow-up visit, he left a tape recorder running overnight in an empty room. When he retrieved it the next morning, the tape contained hours of static X for a brief segment recorded at exactly 3:07 a.m. The voice was faint, female, angry. "You are not welcome," it said. The Warrens never released the audio. Ed believed that public exposure could provoke further activity, not just in the house, but for anyone who listened. He had seen cases where obsession acted like an invitation, Lorraine agreed. She insisted that some recordings were better left unheard as the years passed. The Conjuring House faded from public attention till Hollywood found it. When producers approached the Warrens decades later, Ed cooperated cautiously. He allowed certain details to be shared, others to be dramatized, but he refused to hand over the full case file. When asked why, he gave a simple answer. "Some doors," he said, "should never be opened twice." What viewers never see is what happened during the filming of early adaptations. Crew members reported equipment malfunctions, sudden illnesses, and recurring nightmares tied specifically to the house's imagery. One technician allegedly quit after dreaming of an old woman standing at the foot of his bed, whispering his name. These reports were dismissed as stress, but the pattern was familiar. The house did not need to be present. It only needed to be remembered. When the Warrens passed away, their unreleased files were locked away. Some claim copies still exist. Others believe Lorraine destroyed the most dangerous material before her death. What is certain is that the Conjuring House never truly became quiet when new owners opened it to the public. Investigators documented activity that mirrored the Perron's experiences, almost exactly objects moving, women being targeted more aggressively than men, and a spike in disturbances whenever someone attempted to challenge the house's authority. And then, suddenly, it closed again. No explanation, no farewell tours, just silence. Which brings the story back to 2025, to an auction listing that avoided history, to a house once again changing hands, and to a question that no one wants to answer. If the Warrens were right, if the entity was never tied to a single family, then what exactly is being sold? A historic farmhouse, or custody of something that has been waiting centuries for a new presence to claim? In the decades following the Perron family's departure, the Conjuring House remained largely untouched, wrapped in a veil of silence and local superstition. However, as public fascination with the paranormal grew in the 21st century, interest in the infamous Rhode Island farmhouse resurged. The rise of paranormal tourism and ghost hunting television shows fueled a new wave of curiosity. By the early 2020s, Entrepreneurs recognized the potential goldmine in opening the house to the public as a haunted attraction. In 2023, the property was purchased by a company specializing in authentic paranormal experiences. Their goal was straightforward: transform the house into a destination for thrill seekers, skeptics, and believers alike, offering overnight stays, guided tours, and live investigations. Marketing campaigns promised guests an unforgettable encounter with history and horror. The reopening was met with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Locals warned outsiders to stay away. Some saw the venture as disrespectful to the house's troubled past. Others simply doubted the company's ability to control the unpredictable forces said to linger within. But the allure of the unknown was irresistible to many. Almost immediately, reports of paranormal activity flooded social media platforms. Visitors posted videos of unexplained shadows darting across hallways, faint whispers captured on audio recorders, and flickering lights that defied electrical explanations. Some shared chilling accounts of cold spots that left them shivering uncontrollably. Others described feelings of being watched or touched by unseen hands. Among these reports, a recurring theme emerged. The house seemed to single out women, echoing the Perron family's earlier experiences. Female guests reported intense nightmares featuring a ghostly woman in period dress, often described as angry or sorrowful. Several claimed to have seen fleeting glimpses of a pale figure in the corners of their vision, vanishing whenever confronted. Security footage recorded strange anomalies as well, objects moving on their own, doors opening without cause, and sudden temperature drops. In some instances, cameras malfunctioned inexplicably, deleting hours of recorded footage. The company attempted to maintain control, hiring paranormal investigators and installing advanced surveillance equipment. Yet, the phenomena persisted. Some investigators reported feeling uneasy, their devices detecting electromagnetic fields and unexplained energy surges in specific rooms, particularly those associated with the former Perron family bedrooms. Despite these warnings, the business thrived. Guests were eager to challenge the unknown, and the house's reputation only grew. However, with growing popularity came increasing incidents. Visitors experienced panic attacks, hallucinations, and in some cases, physical injuries attributed to unseen forces. Several staff members resigned, citing psychological distress. In late 2024, a particularly alarming event occurred. A group conducting a live-streamed investigation reported witnessing a figure resembling Bathsheba Sherman manifesting in full form, moving through the house and interacting with their equipment. The broadcast abruptly cut out, and the stream was never resumed. Authorities were called after multiple trespassing incidents and reports of vandalism. But official investigations yielded no conclusive evidence of criminal activity or paranormal interference. The house, however, seemed to react defensively to outside interference, as if guarding its secrets. By mid-2025, rumors began circulating of a shadowy figure lurking near the property at night, unseen by cameras but felt by those nearby. Local residents claimed to hear eerie chanting drifting through the woods, and some reported livestock behaving erratically near the fences. All signs pointed to one truth: the house's restless spirits had returned, stronger and more active than ever. Then just weeks before Halloween 2025, the announcement came the house would be auctioned. No explanation was given, no assurances about the safety or future of the property. Only the knowledge that the Conjuring House was about to pass into new hands. From the moment the Conjuring House reopened as a paranormal attraction, a pattern emerged. Some visitors never truly left. Not in the way most would assume. They came eager to explore, to challenge the darkness. They took photos, recorded EVP sessions, and posted videos filled with excitement and disbelief. But as time passed, many returned, changed. Some spoke of nightmares that wouldn't end, while others withdrew from friends and family, haunted by invisible burdens. One such visitor was Amy Caldwell, a young urban explorer and content creator with thousands of followers on social media. Drawn by the house's notorious reputation, she planned an overnight stay in the Perron family's former bedroom. Her live stream drew hundreds of viewers as she set up cameras and whispered stories of past hauntings. In the early hours, Amy began to experience what she described as whispers in the walls. Viewers on her stream reported hearing soft, anguished voices speaking in low tones. Suddenly, her footage glitched, and the video cut out for several minutes. When the stream resumed, Amy was pale and visibly shaken. She told her audience that she felt watched, and that something had brushed past her just off camera. After the live stream, Amy's behavior changed. She became withdrawn and secretive, frequently canceling plans and ignoring messages. Close friends noticed bruises on her arms that she refused to explain. Months later, she vanished without a trace. Her family reported her missing, but the last known location remained the Conjuring House. Amy's case was not isolated. Another visitor, Mark Stevens, a skeptic and amateur investigator, mocked the house's legend during his stay. Yet, he returned home, pale and anxious, suffering from severe insomnia and panic attacks. Mark later confessed to hearing voices urging him to stay with us forever, to join the family. He moved across the country, cutting all ties to his previous life. Local law enforcement and search parties were unable to find definitive links between disappearances and the house. Many cases were dismissed as voluntary absences or unrelated incidents. But among paranormal communities, a theory gained traction. The house claimed more than memories. It claimed souls. Families of the missing spoke in hushed tones of an invisible tether. A connection forged during visits that pulled their loved ones back to the house's unseen domain. Some reported dreams of the missing trapped inside dark rooms, crying for release. As the years passed, the house accumulated stories of guests never heard from again, of strange phone calls with no one on the other end, and of eerie figures glimpsed by neighbors after midnight. The house's legend grew darker. Fed by these whispered tragedies, several investigators who spent extended time inside the house reported sensations of being trapped, of time slipping away. One even claimed to find herself standing in a corridor she didn't recognize, unable to find a way out. She described a presence watching her, waiting. Most chillingly, some claimed the house could manipulate reality, itself closing doors to block escape, distorting hallways into labyrinths, and feeding on visitors' fears until they lost their grip on sanity. This escalation of activity culminated in a widely publicized incident in early 2025 during a private investigation. A well-known paranormal team recorded what appeared to be a shadowy figure dragging one of their members into a wall. The victim vanished for several minutes, only to reappear disoriented and unable to recall what had happened. The video footage circulated widely online, fueling renewed interest and dread. Despite warnings, thrill seekers continued to flock to the property, and still, some never returned the same. The Conjuring House held its secrets tightly until an unexpected discovery shattered the fragile calm that had settled in some of its darker corners. During routine renovations in early 2025, workers uncovered a hidden trapdoor beneath a loose floorboard in what had once been the Perron family's living room. The hatch was ancient, its edges worn smooth by time, and it led to a narrow, claustrophobic crawlspace. Extending beneath the house's foundation, curiosity soon replaced caution as the property managers authorized a small team of investigators and historians to explore the newly found passage. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and recording devices, the team descended into the darkness, unaware that this would mark one of the most significant discoveries in the house's tortured history. The crawlspace was cramped, smelling of earth and decay. As they crawled deeper, the team found remnants of old objects, rusted tools, fragments of clothing, and bones. But what chilled them was not the ordinary detritus of an old property. It was the arrangement of these remains. The bones appeared deliberately placed in small clusters, surrounded by strange symbols scratched into the wooden beams. One investigator, a historian specializing in occult practices, recognized the markings, immediately symbols associated with witchcraft, trials, and curses, common in 17th and 18th century New England. The implication was clear. The house's dark past extended far deeper than anyone had known. The team's most disturbing find was a small, sealed box wrapped in ancient cloth. Inside were dozens of pins, each stained dark with rust or dried blood. Alongside them lay a weathered diary belonging to Bathsheba Sherman, the woman whose name haunted the house's modern legacy. Bathsheba's diary revealed chilling details. She wrote of rituals intended to bind spirits to the land, curses placed on rival families, and desperate pleas for protection against unseen enemies. The final pages were scrawled with frantic handwriting, describing voices that whispered in the night and shadows that moved without light. She spoke of sacrifice of pain meant to guard the house for eternity. The diary ended abruptly. Returning above ground, the team felt the house's atmosphere shift palpably. The air grew heavy, the shadows darker. Electronic devices flickered and died, as if warning them to stop digging further. News of the discovery leaked quickly, reigniting media attention. Paranormal experts debated the implications. Some believed the trapdoor and its contents explained the house's malevolent behavior, a physical connection to dark magic that fed the haunting. Others warned that disturbing the crawlspace had only strengthened the entity's hold, awakening forces that had been dormant. Visitors reported increased activity. In the months that followed, whispers from beneath the floors, sudden chills, and the feeling of unseen eyes tracking their every move. The house seemed to pulse with renewed energy, as though feeding on the secrets unearthed. The discovery forced the question no one wanted to ask. Was the house merely haunted? Or was it a prison built to contain something far worse? The Conjuring House had become more than just a physical structure. It was a vessel for stories, rumors, and theories that stretched far beyond the walls of the farmhouse itself. In towns surrounding the property, whispers circulated about the origins of the dark force that had haunted the land for centuries. These legends mingled fact and fiction, history and hysteria, creating a tangled web that made uncovering the truth almost impossible. One popular theory suggested that the land had been cursed long before Bathsheba Sherman arrived. Some local historians believed the site was once a sacred place for Native American tribes, desecrated by early settlers. This desecration, they argued, unleashed a malevolent energy that fed on the pain and death that followed. According to these accounts, Bathsheba's rituals were attempts to control rather than create. The darkness, another persistent story, claimed that Bathsheba Sherman was a witch-hand actual practitioner of dark magic who had made a pact with evil forces. Skeptics dismissed these tales as folklore born from fear and superstition, but believers pointed to the diary found beneath the floorboards as evidence. The diary's cryptic entries and descriptions of arcane symbols lent credence to this version of history. Yet, another theory posited that the entity was not human at all. Paranormal experts speculated that it might be a demon or ancient spirit tied to the land, using Bathsheba's identity as a mask to manipulate the living. This being, they argued, thrived on fear and suffering, growing stronger with each new victim and each fresh tragedy. But the darkest theories were whispered in hushed tones among seasoned investigators, suggestions that the house was a gateway, a thin place between worlds where the veil separating the living from the dead was dangerously fragile. These investigators believed the house's history of death and despair had created a nexus, a focal point for supernatural activity that could attract forces far beyond human understanding. Some even warned that those who spent too much time inside risked becoming trapped not physically, but spiritually. The house, they said, did not just haunt, it claimed souls. It used the living as vessels, feeding off their energy and memories, and turning them into permanent residents of its shadowy domain. To make matters more complicated, misinformation spread rapidly. Sensationalized media reports, fabricated stories by thrill-seekers, and the growing popularity of paranormal entertainment blurred the lines between reality and fiction. It became difficult for outsiders to separate genuine warnings from exaggerated tales designed to attract clicks and views. Despite the confusion, one thing remained consistent. The Conjuring House's legend was a tapestry of pain, fear, and mystery, stories still being written, with each new chapter darker than the last. And as 2025 unfolded, the question loomed larger than ever. Which of these stories was closest to the truth? Behind closed doors and locked archives, the Warrens maintained a collection of confidential files that delved far deeper into the Conjuring House's dark history than anything made public. These documents revealed disturbing details about encounters and investigations that were never shared outside their inner circle. Among the most unsettling was a report on a forbidden ritual rumored to have been performed centuries ago to bind the house's malevolent spirit. According to the Warrens' research, Bathsheba Sherman was not merely a victim or a witch, but a key figure in a secret Covenantan occult pact made between early settlers and ancient entities. This pact aimed to claim and protect the land by invoking dark powers, but it came with a terrible cost. The ritual was meant to imprison a powerful spirit beneath the house, using sacrifices and symbolic bindings to contain it. In doing so, the settlers hoped to protect their community from chaos, but they inadvertently tethered evil to the very ground they claimed. The ritual's ingredients were gruesome: blood, bones, and incantations whispered in forgotten tongues. It was believed that the sacrifice of a living being, bound by bloodline or fate, was necessary to seal the covenant. Bathsheba Sherman, accused and ostracized by her neighbors, was said to have been both perpetrator and victim, an unwilling vessel, sacrificed to maintain the house's dark power. The Warrens documented strange phenomena tied directly to the ritual's remnants: symbols carved into the house's beams, hidden compartments beneath the floors, and cursed objects that carried residual energy. Attempts to remove or destroy these artifacts often resulted in violent backlashes, fires, poltergeist activity, and physical attacks on those involved. Lorraine Warren's psychic investigations suggested that the ritual had fractured the boundary between worlds, leaving the house vulnerable to incursions by spirits and demons. Bathsheba's spirit, whether trapped or willingly bound, was believed to be a guardian and prisoner at once, both protecting and perpetuating the house's evil. The Warrens sought to reverse the ritual, but faced obstacles. The church, wary of interfering with forces it barely understood, declined to authorize a full exorcism. Without ecclesiastical sanction, any attempt risked catastrophic consequences, not just for the house's residents, but for the surrounding community. Private attempts by the Warrens and trusted allies resulted in partial successes, but ultimately failed to break the cycle. The house seemed to resist cleansing, almost as if aware of every move against it. In one chilling account, Lorraine described sensing a presence that communicated a single word repeatedly during a seance: bloodline. The implication was clear: there was a family connection, a curse passed down through generations, binding the living to the house's dark legacy. This revelation added a new layer of dread for the parents, descendants, and anyone connected to the property. The house was not merely a haunted location, it was a living curse, one that reached across time to claim new victims. The Warrens' secret files remain sealed, their full contents known only to a handful of trusted individuals. But the fragments that have emerged paint a bleak picture. The Conjuring House is less a place to be feared for ghosts, and more a battleground for ancient, relentless forces that thrive on pain, fear, and sacrifice. The deeper the world's fascination with the Conjuring House grew, the more evident it became that curiosity came with a steep cost. Over the years, investigators, thrill seekers, and tourists alike paid a heavy tollsome with their sanity, others with their very lives. One chilling pattern emerged from reports and testimonials. Those who sought to uncover the house's secrets too aggressively often met with terrifying consequences. Cameras mysteriously shattered, recording devices erased crucial footage, and visitors experienced sudden, violent illnesses or unexplained injuries. Many described an overwhelming sense of being watched, hunted, or manipulated by unseen forces. Among the most harrowing accounts was that of Michael Harris, a renowned paranormal investigator who publicly challenged the house's legend, calling it a hoax. During an extended investigation in 2023, Michael claimed to have captured definitive evidence disproving any supernatural presence. However, after spending several nights within the house, he abruptly ceased all public communication. When his team checked on him, they found Michael incoherent, his eyes hollow and haunted. He refused to discuss his experiences, only whispering fragments about voices that promised eternal company and blood debts. Medical professionals diagnosed him with severe psychosis, but even therapy failed to restore his mental health. Michael's case became a grim warning to others. Similarly, several employees working at the house's paranormal attraction reported strange occurrences. Some quit after experiencing sleep paralysis, accompanied by visions of a gaunt woman beckoning from the shadows. Others spoke of nightmares so vivid they could not distinguish dreams from reality. A handful reported physical scratches and bruises, with no logical explanation. Local authorities recorded multiple emergency calls from visitors trapped inside the house's maze-like corridors during peak activity. Although everyone was eventually found safe, many reported time distortions, minutes turning into hours, hallways rearranging themselves, and exits vanishing only to reappear later. Psychologists studying these cases speculated that the house might exert a psychological influence, manipulating perception and memory. Even the Warrens themselves were not immune. Ed Warren, in his later years, admitted privately that some cases left permanent scars on his soul. Lorraine described episodes of exhaustion and emotional drain after investigating the Conjuring House, feeling as if the darkness had latched onto spirit. The ultimate price of curiosity was most starkly visible in the Perron family. Generations later, descendants still struggled with unexplained maladies, nightmares, and a sense of being tethered to a place they had long left behind. Some believed that the house's curse reached beyond the physical world, binding souls and memories in an unending cycle of torment. As the auction date approached in late 2025, these warnings intensified. Paranormal experts issued statements cautioning potential buyers, emphasizing the importance of respecting the house's history and the dangers of underestimating what lurked within. Yet, the house remains silent, waiting, and hungry for new stories to write in its dark, endless ledger. By the autumn of 2025, the Conjuring House was the subject of intense speculation. News of its impending auction spread rapidly through social media, paranormal forums, and news outlets. The announcement was brief but chilling. A centuries-old farmhouse, infamous for its dark history and supernatural activity, was being sold to the highest bidder. For many, it was an irresistible opportunity. Investors, paranormal enthusiasts, thrill seekers, and even skeptics prepared to vie for ownership of one of the most notorious haunted properties in the United States. But alongside excitement grew an undercurrent of fear. Local residents warned that the house was more than just a building. They told stories of strange lights flickering in the windows at night, unnatural cold spots in the surrounding woods, and an eerie silence that fell suddenly, like a breath held too long. Some claimed to have seen a pale woman watching from the upper windows, her eyes glowing faintly. filled with sorrow and rage. Paranormal experts issued dire warnings. Buying the house, they said, was not just a financial transaction. It was accepting responsibility for a darkness that had claimed lives and sanity for generations. They cautioned that the entity's influence was not confined to the property, could spread, affecting those who dared challenge it. Despite these warnings, the auction date was set for Halloween night, a choice that many saw as deliberate. The symbolic timing only intensified speculation that the house's malevolent presence was growing stronger, feeding on the fear and anticipation swirling around it in the weeks leading up to the auction. Unexplained phenomena escalated. Visitors to the property reported shadows moving against the light, disembodied whispers carried by the wind, and cold hands brushing against skin. Security cameras captured fleeting images of figures no one could identify, vanishing before alarms could be triggered. The company managing the auction took precautions, installing enhanced surveillance and restricting access. Still, trespassers attempted to enter, drawn by curiosity and the lure of the unknown. Several were caught on camera, fleeing in terror, some visibly shaken, others inexplicably injured. Among those watching closely was a group of descendants from the Perron family. They gathered privately, sharing stories of inherited nightmares and unshakable dread. Many had never seen the house, but felt its presence like a shadow looming over their lives. For them, the auction was not just a sale, it was a reckoning. As the night of Halloween approached, a sense of finality settled over the property. The Conjuring House stood silent and imposing, its secrets waiting to be bargained away along with whatever dark forces still called it home. As the Halloween auction drew near, the pool of bidders for the Conjuring House grew as diverse as it was mysterious. Among the expected wealthy investors and paranormal enthusiasts, rumors circulated of shadowy figures placing anonymous bids, individuals whose motives were far from clear, and whose presence at the auction raised more questions than answers. Among these enigmatic bidders was a man known only as Mr. Blackwood, a collector of occult artifacts with a reputation for acquiring items linked to the supernatural. No one had ever seen his face. His identity was veiled behind layers of secrecy, and his bids were placed through intermediaries. Whispers in paranormal circles suggested Blackwood was searching for a way to harness the house's dark power for his own inscrutable purposes. Another bidder was a self-proclaimed medium named Evelyn Graves, who claimed ancestral ties to the land. She insisted that her family had been guardians against the darkness for centuries, and that she alone had the knowledge to finally end the curse. Evelyn's calm demeanor belied a fierce determination, and she was willing to pay any price. Then there were the skeptics, corporate entities eager to turn the property into a tourist attraction or luxury retreat. Dismissing the house's reputation as superstition, their bids were pragmatic, devoid of emotion or belief until inexplicable incidents caused some to reconsider. The bidding process was intense, with offers climbing steadily as midnight approached. Each new bid was met with growing tension among attendees. The air seemed charged, as if the house itself were listening. Behind the scenes, strange occurrences escalated. Power outages swept the building, causing sudden darkness. Some bidders reported feeling sudden nausea, vertigo, or overwhelming dread. One prominent investor withdrew after witnessing a shadowy figure emerged from a wall and move silently across the room. Security footage from the auction house showed anomalies to objects moving independently, flickers of ghostly figures appearing briefly on camera, and a chilling whisper captured just before the highest bid was placed. The final moments of the auction were marked by an eerie silence as the last bid was announced. The winner's identity was shrouded in mystery, never fully disclosed to the public. Some speculated it was Mr. Blackwood. Others believed Evelyn Graves had succeeded. A few whispered darker possibilities. What was certain, however, was that the house had a new owner, and with that, a new chapter began, a chapter where the line between living and dead, between reality and nightmare, would blur more than ever before. The house was silent as the sun set on Halloween night, its weathered facade bathed in the cold light of a rising full moon. Inside, the new owner stepped over the threshold, key in hand, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. Few knew the identity of this mysterious buyer. Some said it was a wealthy occult collector. Others whispered of darker intentions. The first night in the Conjuring House was not welcoming. As the owner explored room by room, the atmosphere thickened. Cold spots rippled through the air, brushing against skin like icy fingers. Faint whispers echoed in empty corridors, and shadows shifted just beyond vision. The house seemed to breathe live, watching, waiting. By midnight, the activity escalated. Doors slammed shut without cause. Lights flickered erratically, casting grotesque shapes on peeling wallpaper. A sudden chill filled the living room, and the fireplace roared to life. Despite having been extinguished earlier, the new owner's attempts to rationalize were interrupted by a sudden presence in the hallway, a figure appearing briefly at the edge of sight. A gaunt woman in old-fashioned dress, her eyes glowing with a sorrowful fury. The air thickened with tension as the figure seemed to communicate a silent message. The house was no longer a place to conquer, but one to respect or suffer the consequences. Throughout the night, objects moved of their own accord. Footsteps echoed from the attic, where no one dared to venture. The owner's dreams were invaded by visions of past tragedies, the screams of the Perron family, the whispered curses of Bathsheba Sherman, and the eternal hunger of the house itself. By dawn, exhaustion overwhelmed the new owner. Yet the house's hold had only deepened. The presence was palpable, a dark tether binding the visitor to its cursed walls. Outside, the wind carried distant voices, a mixture of warning and invitation. The Conjuring House had claimed its newest chapter, and its story was far from over.